All right, good morning, everybody. I'm really sorry I'm late. My car was a little more covered than I was expecting it to be this morning. I should have known. I thought I had it uncovered yesterday, but then we must have gotten some snow again last night. So anyway, apologies, that won't happen very often, but it did today. So today I want us to start thinking about the American founding and what's going on in the American founding, and especially with the ideas that we're going to see circulating around today. I'd like to look at the Declaration of Independence, but for the next several classes, we're going to be really considering what's happening in terms of this creation of America. And the world has never seen anything like the creation of America. This is utterly unique in the history of the world. And as I had mentioned to you previously, really when we think about America, we can think first and foremost about, in Western civilization, about the advent of Christianity, which just metastasized in the best way the idea of freedom and of equality, and then we see it politically with the Declaration of Independence. So what the Americans are really thinking is that they are trying to create, and nothing had been done like this really since ancient Rome in any kind of spectacular way. We see the creation of the idea of a republic. So the republic becomes the center, really, of all American efforts during the American founding. This idea that somehow we can do what nobody had done except for a few Italian city-states all the way back to ancient Rome. And I have to put it this way, and this is going to sound a little bit kind of wild, but in the same way that if we were to be utopians in this day, in 2026, and we would run around and say something like, we know that we can create, say, a socialist utopia in which everybody is happy and equal, of course we would utterly mock that, and we should utterly mock that. But we would just think that's ridiculous, that's could never happen. The same thing happened at the time of the American founding when people spoke of creating a republic. Everybody thought that's just a pipe dream. That's utopian. That'll never happen. Republics never last. These are kind of fantasy types of governments, but they're not real in any sense. And therefore, to even proclaim such a thing is to show how utterly ignorant and romantic you are. Right? It's just completely dismissed. But what had happened is that the Americans had really lived for almost their entire history up to this point, up to 1776, certainly up to 1761. They had lived what was called under salutary neglect. And that means that the British had all kinds of rules based on what people could do in the colonies, but they never enforced them at all. There was simply no enforcement of those rules. And so salutary neglect actually means a kind of beneficial neglect. That is, it was good that we were left alone. So if you think about the American colonies, even it doesn't matter what kind of colony they were, and of the 13 colonies, there are several different types of colonies. But regardless, whatever type of colony they were, for all intents and purposes, little republics. And they had been governing themselves as little republics. And I think you saw this most clearly when you looked at Pennsylvania. They very definitely had a commonwealth, a republic. And so we need to think about that. What does that mean for the Americans? Well, starting in 1761, the British start thinking in terms of regulating us. And so we had been left alone culturally, we had been left alone religiously, we had been left alone economically. There were no taxes on America during the colonial period. And we had been left alone in terms of our politics. That is, everybody was free to govern themselves until we get to 1761. And starting in 1761, going all the way up until 1776, the British are absolutely interfering with everything that we're trying to do. So now they're going to get involved in all aspects of our life. And remember, for roughly 150 or more years, they had never messed with us at all. So that whole period of salutary neglect is actually absolutely crucial, because it's our time to develop as we need to develop for who and what we are as a distinctively American people. And yet, and I want to put a caveat on this, and I think this is one of those things that's hard to understand, but hopefully it'll make sense, and you guys stop me if it doesn't. But we also have this idea that not only are we American, but we're actually far more English than the English are. That is, we're the true Englishmen. That's what Americans are. They are the true Englishmen, as opposed to what's going on in Britain, where they fail to live up to their own English institutions. And so that's part of the irony of America, and it's one of the reasons that our revolution is such a deeply conservative revolution. It's because we believe that what we're doing is restoring what had gone wrong rather than starting anew. So that's fundamental. Yeah, what's your name?
Brendan.
What is it?
Brendan.
Brendan, thank you.
What flipped for the...
Yeah, let me get into that. So this is a great question. What happens, right? Why 1761? But I want to look backwards, if you guys don't mind. I want to do this in a kind of not chronological, but maybe a reverse chronological way. And let's go ahead and do a fairly close reading of the Declaration. And I'd like you guys, if you have your book, I'd like you to turn to page 134 in your book. And let's just look at what Thomas Jefferson says. And this will get to, hopefully, to Brendan's question. If we don't get to it today, we will on Wednesday. But look at what he says. So Thomas Jefferson, he's just, he will die on July 4th of 1826. And here we find him on May 8th of 1825, right on page 134. And so we have this discussion in which Jefferson is asked by Henry Lee, Robert E. Lee's father. He's asked by Henry Lee, what is it that allowed you to write the Declaration of Independence? And notice what he says here. It's a beautiful, beautiful response. Now, this is a good almost 50 years after he wrote the Declaration. So his memory is not going to be perfect at this point. But this is still the best evidence we have for what that declaration is about. With respect to our rights and the acts of the British government contravening those rights, there was but one opinion on this side of the water. All American Whigs, now don't get confused by that. Whig was just the term that the Americans called themselves. When we look back and when we look at their own language, we usually call them patriots. But that's not what Jefferson and the founders called themselves. They called themselves Whigs, right? This idea of Whigs. A Whig was just someone who who supported Parliament, but opposed the king. Okay, so with respect to our rights and the acts of the British government, but are we on the same page, guys? You guys have a different edition? Sorry. So what you're looking for, if you don't have it, go ahead.
She found it on page 136.
136.
Under Thomas Jefferson to Henry Lee.
Yep.
That first thing that starts with
There. Thank you for good. So 136. Is that what you said? 136. Okay. I'm sorry. I better get my version updated here. Okay. So everybody see that now. Okay. With respect to our rights and the acts of the British government contravening those rights, there was but one opinion on this side of the water. all American Whigs thought alike on these subjects. When forced, therefore, to resort to arms for redress, an appeal to the tribunal of the world was deemed proper for our justification. This was the object of the Declaration of Independence, not to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, not merely to say things which had never been said before, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent, and to justify ourselves in the independent stand we were compelled to take, neither aiming at originality of principle or of sentiment, nor yet copied from any particular and previous writing. It was intended to be an expression of the American mind, and to give to that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. Now, I think that's hard for us because we all, as we should, we have a deep, deep reverence for the Declaration of Independence. And so we like to think of it as this thing that had never been seen before. But notice what Jefferson is saying here. All of the language, all of the ideas, all of the sentiments, they're all deeply rooted in the American experience. And in particular, they're rooted in the experience of salutary neglect. So, to get to Brendan's question, what happens? Well, imagine this. In the 1750s, we have a massive, absolutely massive world war that we Americans only remember as the French and Indian War, but everybody else called it the Great War for Empire. And what we call the French and Indian War was only the North American theater of this vast global conflict. There were fights off Africa, in Asia, all around. It was a global conflict. In fact, if we were truly honest as historians, we would call what happened in the 1750s the First World War. And what happens then during what we call World War I would be World War II, and World War II would be World War III. But we don't do that, right? We start in the 20th century with our world wars. But the point is, the war that was happening between the French and the English in the 1750s was absolutely huge. And this is one of the great ironies in history, Britain wins that war, much to her own surprise, and she discovers that she has an empire. So there was never a British project to create the empire. The British suddenly found themselves with an empire, but they also found themselves in immense debt, huge debt. They had no idea how they were going to pay for this debt. And so they look around and they think, all right, part of our war was to protect the American colonies, therefore the American colonies should pay for it. And that's why they start interfering with us. They start taxing us. And they had never done that before. Brendan, does that make sense? So that's what's happening here. And so the British are intervening in ways they had never done before, and not without opposition. There are all kinds of people in British Parliament who are saying, no, that's not our relationship with America. You have no right to tax her at all. America is our place of economic productivity. That's what she gives to the empire. We do not need to tax her. We need her to keep producing economically to fuel the empire rather than to pay for it, but to fuel it, to give us that economic backbone. And so there's a huge divide in Parliament over this, but the forces that decide to tax and regulate the Americans, they win. And so all throughout the 1760s, we have what's called, and I'll send you guys a study guide on this, but we have what's called the crises period from 1761 up until 1776, where Britain will pass a law, we object and get violent about it, They then repeal the law, but not completely. Then they pass another law, and the whole cycle starts over and over again, where they do something, we react, they react, we react, they react, and we just keep doing this all throughout the 1760s into the 1770s until finally, and it takes a long time, until finally in the spring of 1776, Congress says, enough. We're not doing this anymore. We're going to declare ourselves independent, and we're going to pass the Declaration of Independence. But that's going to take a lot of doing to get that passed in America. And yet, here's part of the irony of this as well with the Declaration. When the Declaration is passed on July 4th of 1776, there had already been 75 independence documents that had been written in the American colonies. And it's wild to see it. Sometimes you have states who declared their own independence. Sometimes the New York firemen declared their independence. There was a grand jury that was meeting in North Carolina. They declared their independence. There were Presbyterian churches around America that were declaring their independence. So when Congress finally acts, it's doing so in a very reactive manner because they're afraid they're going to lose control of the situation. But they're very late coming to the game to declare independence. So there's already a lot going on, and the mood of America is very much in favor of independence. And Congress is being slow about, not surprisingly, Congress is being very slow about this. But notice again what Jefferson says. There is absolutely nothing original in the Declaration of Independence. All these ideas had already been there. And so all Jefferson is doing is taking very unoriginal ideas and presenting them in a very original form. So again, all of these ideas have been there for quite a while. But look what he says then, as he describes this in the last part of that letter. All its authority, right? So the whole Declaration, all of its authority rests then on the harmonizing sentiments of the day, whether expressed in conversation, in letters, printed essays, or in the elementary books of public right. These are the ideas of Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, and Sidney. So we can think about that as a lineage of Western civilization. And what Jefferson is telling us here is that the Declaration is an expression of Western civilization. It's a manifestation of Western civilization. And notice all of its ideas. They go back to Aristotle, Cicero, John Locke, and Algernon Sidney. Right? So those are the four greats who shape what our Declaration of Independence is. All right, do you guys have questions on that? Or what leads to that? So remember what we talked about briefly on Friday, very briefly, maybe all too briefly. But when we're looking at America in the 18th century, when we're thinking about the 1700s, keep in mind that first Great Awakening, that huge explosion of evangelical Christianity, radically shaped the American mind because it started breaking down those denominational differences that had existed there, and therefore it's breaking down colonial differences as well. So I don't think we ever could have come to the point where America writ large was willing to declare independence without that breakdown in traditional denominational realities of the 1600s, right, of the 17th century. But you have that breakdown in the 18th century, and then you see the Americans here. So I want to come back to this idea of what a republic is, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But let's look to the Declaration. So do you guys, can you find that? For me, it's page 126, but hopefully you guys can find it pretty quickly. Anybody see where it starts?
127.
127, okay. So let's just start right at the beginning. the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, all right, so right away, we already have something interesting. There is a course of human events, right? There's actually a philosophy to history. He hasn't laid out what that is yet, but we know that there's a philosophy to history. It becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. All right, opening paragraph, loaded with ideas, absolutely loaded. And it is a deeply philosophical document that Thomas Jefferson is presenting here. And we don't know the mechanics of it. We don't know exactly who wrote what aspect of the Declaration. We know that there were 5 members of the committee that were to write the Declaration. They probably drafted, the 5 members did, but probably John Adams drafted what needed to go into the Declaration of Independence, and then Jefferson wrote it. So we don't know, though, for certain. And in the first 20 to 30 years after the Declaration was passed, no one really knew who wrote it. It wasn't until the 1820s that people started recognizing Thomas Jefferson as the author. But here's what I would say for you guys and for the purposes of our class. Probably Adams and Jefferson drafted it, and then Jefferson wrote it. But Jefferson hated speaking publicly, hated it. It was one of the worst things in his life to get up and give a public speech, whereas John Adams just reveled in speaking publicly. It was his favorite thing to do professionally. And so it's John Adams who gets the Declaration passed by Congress, not Jefferson. Jefferson writes it, but it's Adams who gets it passed and works its way through Congress to get it taken care of. But for the sake of argument, let's just say this is Jefferson. Right? Just for sake of argument, this is Jefferson. So what do we have? All right, when in the course of human events. So we know that there is a philosophy to history. We know that there's a pattern to history. And that pattern is what historians call the logic of rebellion. And this is how they think about it, and how the founders probably thought about it too. So you guys just imagine every one of us in this room, right? And a republic is always organic, always. It's one of the greatest strengths of a republic. It's also one of its greatest weaknesses. It's always organic. And so it's based on the human person. And we'll get into this when we talk about the Constitution, because it's actually based on body parts and the way that our understanding of things is structured. But we'll hold off on that for a moment. But think about this in human life. All right, you guys are all about 18, 19, 20, right? You're 19 and 20. I'm 58. And that's just the way things are. Yeah, so here I am. I'm in a different stage than you guys are. But notice what happened. I had my birth, and then I had my youth, and now I'm in my middle age. And you can tell, I'm it's age, right? Things start moving south. I grade pretty early. I actually grade really early. I grade early. I've got a lot of wrinkles. You guys don't have any of that yet. You guys you're at the prime of your life right now. You're in the best physical shape you guys will ever be. And it's not surprising that, this is the time you start thinking about spouses and getting married. You don't do that when you're my age. I can get away with looking like hell every day because my wife's stuck with me. You guys can't do that, right? And so you have to kind of present yourselves. But you're at that age where you look great. And so think about what that means for the person. It means that all of us in life go through a youth, a birth, a youth, a middle age, and then we die. And so for this course of human events, this idea of the logic of rebellion, the idea is that governments do the same thing. They have a birth, they have a youth, they have a middle age, and then they die. Nobody ever, under any circumstances, creates a republic believing it will be permanent. If you believe that your republic is going to be permanent, you're not a Republican. You don't actually believe in a republic. All republics are temporary. Now think about how different that is. When Hitler created the Third Reich, he thought it'd last 1,000 years. Think about Jefferson. Jefferson says we should have a rebellion about every 20 years. That's a republic. A republic is based on the idea that will only last for a while. And it's really stunning that we're approaching our 250th birthday. That's amazing in every way that we've lasted as long as we have. Yeah, is it Connor?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Jefferson would have thought that the United States would have lasted 250.
None of them would have. Only Madison. There's a great book on this, really great book called The Fears of a Setting Sun. And by a guy named Rasmussen. I can't remember his first name, but Rasmussen is his last name. And he goes through and he looks at all the founding fathers, and this is really sobering, guys. I mean, this is unbelievably sobering. With the exception of Madison, every single one of the signers of the Constitution and the Declaration thought the Republic was already dead by the time they died. They all thought it was over, except for Madison. Madison was the only one who believed that we still held it. Everybody else thought it was gone. That's sobering.
Like based on the state of the government?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll get to what this means here in a moment, or maybe not today, but sometime in the next couple of days. But yeah, they had a very strict definition of what a good government was. And any time that government ever became corrupt in any way whatsoever, if that corruption wasn't dealt with immediately, the republic is over. So the idea, for example, you guys think about the Somali fraud, upwards of $18 billion missing in Minnesota. That's outrageous. I hope you just put that in context for a moment. Hollywood last year made $9 billion. Hollywood, one of our biggest industries in America, made $9 billion. The Somalis have stolen $18 billion, twice what Hollywood is worth. That's incredible. And that kind of thing, when we think about that, and don't get me wrong, I'm not defending ICE or what's going on right now, but there's a reason that ICE descended upon Minnesota. There's a very serious reason. And, they may not be handling it well, but they had every right to go in and investigate this fraud. It's outrageous. So those are the kinds of things we let people get away with that. And so what kind of government do we really have if we're missing $18 billion? That's the kind of thing that the founders would have said, you guys have already blown it, right? It's over. So and that's hard for us, especially at a place like Hillsdale. Most of you wouldn't be at this school if you didn't believe the Republic is still around, right? That's one of the main reasons students come here, and we believe in that. But the Republic is a fragile thing. It's a very fragile thing. Connor, does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. I know it's sobering, right? But it really is incredible. Okay, so what happens then? Well, we have this process, and this is what's called the logic of rebellion. The logic of rebellion is this. Just like none of us in this room could prevent me from becoming middle-aged, we really can't prevent governments from becoming middle-aged either. And so the point is, once a government becomes middle-aged, what do? Do you let it die and start over? Or do you try and preserve it for as long as you can at a steady level? So that's the logic of rebellion. And that's what Jefferson is getting at within the course of human events. This thing has happened. And so what's happened? Our English government became middle-aged. And there's no way to fix it. The only way to save ourselves is to start over. But notice what we do here, and this is where I think we have to be really, really careful. we have in America a revolution, but it doesn't look anything like the French Revolution. It doesn't look anything like the Soviet Revolution of 1917 or the Chinese Revolution of 1949. It doesn't look like the Mexican Revolution of 1917. It looks nothing like that. So what is our revolution? It is truly a revolution. We start at one point, we revolve, and we end up at the same point. That's our revolution. Our revolution is a full revolution. That is, we proclaim that we are the true Englishmen, not the English. We're not overthrowing. Notice what happens in the French Revolution or the Soviet Revolution. You start at one point and you end at the opposite. You've overthrown society. We don't overthrow society at all. Everybody still has their property. They still do what they did politically. The governments maintain themselves. We all believe in common law, which is part of the English tradition going back to the pagans. So we're not revolutionary in the sense of starting over. We're revolutionary in the sense of beginning again. That's different than overthrowing what is. We're trying to reestablish what was rather than start over again. Does that make sense for everyone? So that's what's going on here in our revolution. So again, that logic of rebellion. And then what do we see? Well, now, and we're rooted in this deeply, we're rooted in the laws of nature and of nature's God. So it doesn't matter what Parliament says. Doesn't matter what the king says. Our law is higher than theirs. Our law goes back to God. It goes back to nature. That's the law we obey, not the king's law. And we don't know if this is true or not, but I always love this imagery. The story is, and granted, it's just a story, guys. This could be completely false because I've only seen it in one source and I haven't been able to verify it. But according to one witness, on the day that Congress passed the Declaration, they took a crown, right, a king's crown. They took it and they placed it on the Bible and they declared God the sovereign of America, not King George. Now, I have no idea if that's true or not, but I love the imagery of it. And it does explain something and why we're not radical. You know, think about the French. Who do they kill first? They kill all the priests and the nuns. What happens when the Eastern Orthodox Church, when the communists take over Russia? They line up all the priests and nuns on bridges and they machine gun them down. What happens in America? It's our ministers leading the revolution on the battlefield and from the pulpit. So that's where we're a deeply conservative people in every way. Our religion is totally in favor of the revolution, not the opposition. So that's a great marker for understanding this. So when they say nature's God, that's just the 18th century way of saying God. They're basically saying he who rules nature, God, right, over that. Mary?
I would be wrong, but isn't that almost a direct quote from John Locke, just the laws of nature and nature's God? Isn't that
I don't know about that. I have not seen that in Locke. The part down below of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a paraphrase of Locke. And then the idea of a long train of abuses and usurpations is straight from Locke as well. I don't know, though, Mary, about the laws of nature and nature's God. That I'm not sure of. So, okay, good. But we have to take it seriously. God is mentioned 4 times in the Declaration. So that's going to matter here in a minute. Okay, so the laws of nature and of nature's God, what happens now? Well, every time we separate from another people, we have to declare the reasons why. We have to declare it. Why? And notice how important this is. Because as Americans, we are doing this as a witness to all of humanity. not just to the English, but to all of humanity. And that's going to be really important because this declaration is not about Americans. It is about the human person and understanding the human person. We Americans got there first, but it's about all people everywhere, not just us. So this is a statement of republicanism rather than of nationalism in the way that they're presenting this. Okay, and then we get to the next paragraph, probably the most loaded paragraph here. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now, I want you guys to be very, very, very clear about this. There is no asterisk here. It doesn't say all men except the Jews, or all men except the Muslims, or all men except Somali women. It doesn't say that. Right? It's all men. And they mean this absolutely. Every person born of woman, every person, black, white, male, female, Gentile, Jew, doesn't matter. Every single person is created equal. And that is fundamental. And we know that, even though they kept their slaves, we know that because there's a whole paragraph, and I'll bring this in, but there's a whole paragraph that Jefferson wrote in his original document that Congress took out. But in it, it said, and we have captured men from Africa and enslaved them. And so we know that when Jefferson says men, he doesn't mean white men. He means all human beings. So that's fundamental, and that's absolute. And I want you guys to think about how hard this is. And this is why I said on our first day of meeting with one another, what is the Declaration? It is a promissory note. Not everything works out right away, but over time, we have done our best as an American people to make that statement real. If you guys were writing a thesis statement of America, that would be your thesis statement right there. That is the thesis statement of America. And so what does this mean? We are the first country. We're not the first people. The Christians are the first to do this. But we are the first country to declare the dignity of mankind. We're the first to do that. Christianity is the first religion to declare it. We're the first country to make it real. That's incredible, guys. I mean, I can't exaggerate that enough. And again, it's not that we don't have our sins. We do. We have lots of them. But when we look at what we did right, we really did this right. Really did it right. So, what do we need to even argue about? I don't need to argue about this at all. It's self-evident. We all know this. It's written on our hearts, as Paul tells us in Romans. Right? We know this. It is self-evident. So I don't have to give you a list of propositions why man is dignified. It is self-evident. We know it by being human. We know it by looking at the other and recognizing their humanity. Why? Because they are endowed by their Creator, mention number 2 of God, with certain unalienable rights. Now, there's no such word as unalienable. Jefferson meant inalienable, but he uses unalienable. Do you guys know what that means? What does that mean? If I, Brad, have inalienable rights, can I sell myself into slavery? Absolutely not. In other words, these rights can never be taken away, no matter what. Governments can't take them away. Political bodies can't take them away. Churches can't take them away. You can't take them away, and you can't lose them from yourself. These things cannot be alienated from you. They're fundamental to your very integrity. If I were to take Leon and divorce him from his rights, I would be, for all intents and purposes, deconstructing him as a person. I'm taking down his humanity. By the very fact we are human, these rights in here. And what are they? Well, we don't know, but we know that among them, they're not the only ones, but among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, let's break those down for a bit. Now, let's go back to Mary's point, thinking about John Locke. John Locke said that we have the rights to life, liberty, and property. Jefferson changes that to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But I want you guys to recognize what happiness is. Notice we are not guaranteed happiness. We are guaranteed the right to pursue our happiness. So there's no right to happiness, only a right to pursue it. So, I love public speaking. I have a right to pursue my happiness. As a teacher, as a podcaster, as whatever it may be, I have the right to pursue that. Connor, what are you really good at? Be honest. Don't be humble.
Play music.
What do you play?
I play the organ.
Play the organ. Man, this guy is an awesome organist. Now, what does that mean? It means we stand out of the way and we allow him to play the organ. That's his right to pursue his happiness. Will he ever achieve what he believes is his goal for playing the organ? Maybe, maybe not. But he has the right to pursue that. And we as a community have the duty to allow him to do that. Now, we may take it farther. Maybe now that I know this about Connor, I actually, probably if he tells me he's got a recital, I'm going to come. If he doesn't mind, I'm going to come. I'm going to support him. That's going to be a part of the community, and I would actually think of that as my duty as a friend and a professor. But it's that pursuit of happiness that he has. And frankly, think about this. His organ playing makes us all better. The better he is at it, the better we are as a community. Does that make sense for everyone? So so we don't have to say property. Property's implied in that. Pursuit of happiness is greater than property. But this goes back to Aristotle. Remember, if you guys could go back to your Western heritage, you had to read that one little paragraph or a couple of paragraphs from the Ethics. Remember what Aristotle says in our pursuit of happiness. Our pursuit of happiness is the closest we ever come to being godlike. Because God is nothing if not pure excellence. And so when we pursue our virtue, we are imitating God in a good way. We're not mocking him. We're imitating him because we're struggling to do something beautiful. That's our pursuit of happiness. So when Jefferson says this, he doesn't mean sitting around on your couch watching Netflix and smoking pot. It's not what he means at all. He means we have the right to pursue excellence. And that doesn't mean sitting around on your couch, right? It's something very, very different than that. So it's a very, very high thing. But we also have the right to life, and we have the right to liberty. Now, let's take it just a step farther, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Okay. Does the government have a right to put police in our airports and grope us when we get on planes? Definitely does not, according to Jefferson. It only has the right to protect our rights. That's what it has the right to do. And once you start thinking in radical Jeffersonian terms, you're going to question the FBI and the CIA and even my beloved NASA. If I could pay taxes to anything, I would pay to NASA and the National Park Service. Nothing else. But they're not going to let me do that. So even those organizations, I'm not sure they're legitimate, according to what Jefferson is telling us. I'm not sure. This is, and I hope you guys understand this, as conservative as we are, this is deeply radical. This is deeply radical. What does a government exist to do? It is instituted among men to secure these rights. That's it. There is no other reason for government. It exists for one purpose: to secure our life, our liberty, and our pursuit of happiness. If it goes beyond that, you don't just have the right, you have the duty to overthrow your government. This is radical, guys. I hope you all catch that. This is not what you're going to find in a political party platform. This is deeply, deeply challenging to what authority is. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and their happiness. Jump down, and we're gonna look at this, but let's finish with this today. Jump down to but. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. Again, that is as hardcore as it gets. And you can imagine if you started tweeting these lines out on X, you're probably going to have an FBI file, almost certainly, even though all you're doing is tweeting Jefferson. But you're going to make people very, very nervous over this. Okay, you guys all follow me so far? Okay, we're going to keep going with this on Wednesday, so no new readings. And we're going to talk about what a republic is. We're going to get into that a little bit more. What rights are, what do we mean by that? But all right, guys, thank you. And once again, I apologize I was a couple minutes late.